go.
Start now.
Surprise live.
Ready and
And time for tea and witty banter. Someone said to me the other day, "Oh, it's you do the tea guys thing, don't you?" I was like, "No, it's not tea guys. It's guys drinking tea."
tea guys.
That's different. I don't know what the tea guys are.
Tea guys? We're the tea guys.
I mean, apparently we
No.
are. We're the guys drinking tea.
No, we're not tea guys. We're just plain old guys drinking tea.
The tea is the star of the show.
Welcome to the Guys Drinking Tea Show.
Yeah,
Nice
I'm
to hear
drinking
us.
Earl Grey today.
One of the things I love about this show is that it's almost like we're already in the middle of a conversation and then we just hit record.
And I love the fact that we're wearing matching shirts.
Yeah, how'd that happen? Well, today on this show, we're going to be reviewing a little bit of last week's, or this last Sunday's sermon.
Yeah.
And
you got a week off, so I mean, you have no clue what we're talking about.
I have no idea what we're talking about. So you could tell me.
Preach my sermon directly at you.
Yeah, so you're going to just be hearing Alex preaching again. Oh, interesting. That seems like very loud in one ear. Is it loud in one ear and not the other? That's very strange.
I have no clue what you're talking about.
Our little audio meter, look, it's really loud on one side and really quiet on the other side. Look at that. Is that panned? Strange.
You're using technical terms that are a mystery to me.
Yeah, indeed.
Someone asked me to turn the lights on in the worship center earlier. I was like, I can do that.
I know how to do that.
Yeah, it's one of the few technical things I know how to do. When I knew I was in trouble at a church, I was helping pastor once when someone came up to me in the middle of the service and said, like, "You're the lights guy. You know most about the lights." I'm like, if I know most about the lights, we are in deep trouble.
We've done something terribly wrong.
Something's gone awfully wrong.
That's funny. So in this week's show, hopefully our audio isn't terrible right now. I apologize if it is. It seems like every week for the last month, at least,
since you
there's
moved to
been
this office,
something.
this office must be, I don't know, haunted.
It's like anti-technology or something.
Yeah.
I thought I had all my systems worked out.
Freshly painted, but anti-technology.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about hope, about doubt, and
that doubt.
maybe does Jesus doubt things?
Yeah,
we're going to be talking about
a rabbit trail. We're about to get very Alice in Wonderland. We're going down the rabbit hole.
But something I didn't tell you before we started, we also have to revisit the week before. Because if you don't remember, we skipped last week's stream, and we did have one person ask a question from that stream, just so we can touch on it briefly, but then we'll jump into the rest of the conversation. But man, I missed doing the show.
Aren't you supposed to say something like, we had a question from that stream? There were loads of them, but we selected one. Is that not supposed to be
there was so many questions?
Evangelical marketing. We had a pile of questions and we just took one off the top and it said something.
Yeah.
I did miss it though. I did miss the chatting and the tea.
That was fun.
As you vacationed.
I'm going to just quick pull up the audio here, just enough so that we're not totally wasting everyone's time.
Yeah.
Right now, I apologize.
That's fine.
It sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful.
For the last month, at least.
So we had for those of you there on Sunday in the 9 o'clock, we had a hilarious occurrence where I was played again, like I was on echo, but it was about a 6-minute echo, which was very hard to talk through. I will say it was a fascinating experience, but we got through it, and the tech team jumped in and fixed it.
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning of the message. I went back and I managed to listen to half of the message to try and prep for this.
Yeah. So you want to do Emmaus? We talked the week before.
So here was the question.
Yeah.
So rewind, if you were really hoping to talk about this last Sunday's sermon, just a moment, hang with us. We'll just briefly touch on the question that someone had. The road to Emmaus, from the previous Sunday, was the road to Emmaus text. And the person's question was related to how do you stay in hard situations, and should you always stay in hard situations? Because part of what you talked about in that message was that they were basically... They were checking out. They were stepping out of the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
They'd given up hope on this whole story, and they were trying to get away from the epicenter of what God was doing, which was Jerusalem. And then when Jesus encounters them on the road, and suddenly he reveals himself, they're like, we're back in. They beeline straight back to Jerusalem, and they're back in the story. The question is, What do we do? Should we always stay in a hard situation?
And what I would say is, I actually did say in the sermon, some stories have to be left. But I appreciate in a
Unpack
whole
that a
sermon
little bit
around.
more.
So, I mean, there's some really quick, obvious examples that you might come up with that you would say, I wouldn't want people to hear, oh, you should stay in an abusive relationship. Like that, like to hear someone say marriage is hard and you need to work at it can be heard as, when I'm in a relationship that's abusive, that means that it's my duty to stay. And that I don't think certainly isn't what we're saying, or I'm saying in that. There's places you might be in a business practice with someone who's practicing things illegally. It's time to get out. So there's easy certainties. I don't know that's always our. That for the most part, that's our thing. Like the most of the time, I think we want to get out of stories because they're no longer convenient to us. And this for me, it felt heavy, and it felt heavy because it came very much from a place of, this felt personal to me. I feel like I quite easily get into like I'm an Enneagram 7. I want everything to be happy and joyful. So when a moment becomes difficult, that's where my temptation goes. It's like, oh, new story. Let's just start again. This is going to sound like a ridiculous example. When I was about 17, 18, I was addicted to this soccer management game. You got to buy players and you got to like have your team and had to try and get them to the top of the league, win the championship. Yeah,
I appreciate that you used our term.
I was trying to speak the language of the natives.
Contextualizing for us.
Football. And so I regularly would have moments where it wasn't going, the season wasn't going as I wanted it to go. So I'd just be like, just going to start a new game. I'm just going to start a new game. Oh, I'll just start a new game. And I'd always go back and so that's the Enneagram 7 in me. I want things to be easy. So I think there's certainly stories that you need to walk away from. There's certainly stories that we're tempted to just give up on. Maybe the question was specifically, how do you know the difference?
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. And so I always think, like, I think in those moments, I just spoke to a bunch of teenagers yesterday at a school down the road. And one of the questions they wanted to ask was on dating. It's a Christian school. They wanted to know, should you date? And I was like, wow, that's a big conversation. But one of my encouragements to them was, if you decide you want to date as a teenager, find someone you trust to have good conversations with about it. Someone who's had some experience, who's a little bit older. Don't go to your other teenagers who are all in exactly the same position as you and say, hey, what do you think? Do you think I should date this guy? Because they'll probably say, yeah, absolutely. Go to someone that's actually been through some journeys. And if there's a big reticence in you that says, I don't want to go and ask other people's advice, well, then that maybe is a little bit of a flag of, well, why don't you want somebody else's advice? It's maybe not just because it's an embarrassing situation. It's maybe because you don't want to hear the no, don't do this. You've already kind of made your decision. So when there's a story that you feel like, this feels like something to exit, this feels like something to leave, I would always hope that I, in that situation, would say to someone else, Aaron, how do you see this? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? There's just a wisdom that comes with that. Yep. And someone said to me the other day,
especially if you ask me specifically.
Absolutely. I'm going to get the palpable wisdom of the beard and the gray hair and everything. It's just,
you mean like the hooligan look? Yeah. So you're like, I doubt the wisdom of your whole appearance right now. So I'm not sure I should ask you.
I think if you kept growing it, you could get the Moses type wisdom.
That's
Moses
awesome.
Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. So I think there's hopefully someone in all of us. And if there isn't, that's a good challenge. Who do you do community with? Yes. Who's your conversation points? I very rarely make decisions alone. I'm trying to think of what decisions I make alone. And usually decisions I make alone are not that great. I've talked a few times in the last year about stock decisions, crypto decisions I've made, and right now they're not looking that good.
Let's be honest. If you invest at all, there is no right decision
That's
right now.
true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Everyone's a
we're
loser
all
right
just-
now.
Yeah. Is there a situation
Which was
should-
was also the opposite over the last few years. Everyone was a genius in the stock market prior to this year.
Yeah, is there a situation you should get out of? Yes, investments.
Yeah.
Put your money in a mattress and hope that everything turns out fine.
Oh man.
So
What a mess.
I just have found historically, yes, almost every decision I've got somebody that I'll go and ask, and get their wisdom from. And I would hope if you have people in your lives that you trust, if you're in again, to go back to the abusive relationship example, if you go to someone that you trust that loves you, you get the wisdom of, okay, you don't stay there. You at least distance yourself for a while and make sure there's good counseling and good conversations. I'm not saying that has to end in a divorce or something. I'm saying there has to be a pause. There has to be a safe space.
Yeah.
So I think knowing, it's like all things, knowing the distinction between those two, that's a difficult challenge.
It is. So the answer is there's no right answer. Or there's maybe a right answer within each individual situation, but every situation is different. And so that's a hard one.
But I think an easy answer, an easy definite thing you can do is find a wise voice into it.
Yeah, for sure.
There's almost, I have a feeling there's almost nothing that we go through that should be carried alone, completely alone. You know, the stuff that you have to carry the weight of, but the counsel, the voice in, I'm not convinced that we're ever wired to believe that we are the only voice into a situation.
Yeah.
And maybe someone will reply and say, what about this situation? And I'll say yes. But even the fact that we're wrestling with exceptions suggests there's a general rule. If you're making a decision, why not run it by someone who's fairly wise?
Yeah. And the part of the reason it is a hard thing is because challenge is a necessity for growth.
Definitely.
And we know that as human beings there's a lot of illustrations of it from all sorts of categories of human existence. If you want to be stronger, you have to put strain on your muscles.
And if
you want to be healthier, you have to put strain on your body through like diet stuff. Like generally speaking, going the easy way is never a recipe for growth and success. But that doesn't always mean, and then the flip side is there's also like a staying that's damaging.
Yeah.
And so, it's a hard one.
So it's really interesting when you think about the world of narrative. Like I love bringing in narrative elements from different stories, literature, how we write, all of those different things. When you look at almost every book, they speak of challenge, and then they speak of the success, the challenge is met, but they very rarely tap into the moment after the challenge is met and what happens then. So classic, epic narrative, Lord of the Rings, there is the problem, there is the meeting of the problem, Frodo goes, he gets rid of the ring, spoiler alert, and then the kingdom is at peace, but they never wrestle with what a kingdom at peace looks like. Because in a kingdom of peace, usually a bunch of guys sit around getting very bored and then start acting out. It's almost like there's this weird tension that takes takes
I bet
place
you
everywhere.
know this progression. There's like a saying, and you just like know like literature like crazy, and so sometimes
like this is a test.
here's a pop quiz.
Yeah.
There's like this progression of like strong men make peace. Peace makes weak men.
Yes.
Weak men
absolutely make
war.
Yeah. Strong men make
peace.
Yeah, that's the tension.
Was that the progression?
Something, I mean, I don't know the exact
There's like a
word,
really pithy way of saying that. But
Yeah, you end up in these weird places. Now, interestingly, we went from Emmaus to Thomas.
Yeah,
not
transitioning.
necessarily in order, because it's hard to pick out definite orders sometimes with different writers. But you've got this moment where two guys, potentially a guy and a girl. There's a bit of ambiguity there. Some people have suggested it's Cleopas and his wife. The other
It just
person
says
is never
friend,
named. It
right?
just says friend. Or just companion. They are walking together is simply the statement. Jesus
and most
comes
likely, if it was a woman, it would have been his wife.
Yes.
Most likely.
Yes, like 99.9%. Otherwise, it looks questionable.
In that
You
culture.
didn't just go strolling with random people. So these guys are leaving the story in amongst their hopelessness. Thomas has similar emotional responses to what's happened. There is a hopelessness for Thomas, but he doesn't go anywhere. I mean, that's the interesting thing. Thomas sticks around.
So here's my question. We talked at the beginning, we said that part of the show is going to be talking about hope, hopelessness, and doubt and all this stuff. One of the things you talked about in the message was that maybe Thomas gets a little bit of a bad rap. Like,
yeah, I think
there's this whole like idiom, like language idiom in the Western world that's a doubting Thomas.
Yeah.
So can you paint an alternative picture of Thomas for us?
So I think the alternative picture, I'm going to use Lord of the Rings again because I don't use it often enough. I don't remember the last time.
You get on these trends, these illustration trends.
Illustration trends. But there's this bit where, there's this bit where, if you watched it in the movies or read it in the book, the riders of Rohan, the horsemen, come like riding down the hillside and they're like charging in, like yelling death, like, you know, we're going to kill them, but we're probably going to die as well. Same with the Greek myths of the Battle of Thermopylae. I think it's Thermopylae. The 300 Spartans,
the good old battle.
The 300 Spartans fight the 10,000 other Greeks, and they know that there's no way, there's no survival. That's Thomas. Thomas, when Jesus is going back to Judea, all the other disciples, and maybe even including Thomas, are like, this is a really bad plan. We're definitely all going to, you're certainly going to die, Jesus. They tried to kill you once. There's no way if you do this again, you're not going to die.
That's John
chapter 11, right before he goes back to see Lazarus, right before he goes back to, so you can pull it up.
I'm going to pull it up because I want to read it. So keep going.
Yeah, give us the... So, I mean, almost the verbatim language is, let us go that we might die with him.
Yes.
But the other disciples are trying to persuade him. Is Thomas trying to persuade him not to do it? We don't really know. But certainly when he knows Jesus has made up his mind, there's very much just this picture of Thomas that he's like, 300 Spartans, riders of Rohan, we're just going. And the worst is the worst is not that I die. The worst is that I don't go with Jesus. The second worst may be that I die. But if I have a choice right now between leaving Jesus and death, I'm picking death. So that's such an interesting, so the language I used was the language of ride or die. That's who Thomas is. He's like, I'm sticking with you.
So it's this line, verse 16. Let's pull it up here. So they're going to go, and there's all sorts of reasons why going to see Lazarus is dangerous, right? Or this whole situation. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus. It's interesting that his nickname's mentioned twice, which just means twin.
Really, it just gives... I almost think, like... I'm not saying the story's not real. I'm just saying that John is like good story, bad story. There's a little bit of like, he's got the Thomas in his highlight moment, and then he's going to have Thomas in his negative moment later. So I'm pretty sure there's some connection going on just in the literature.
Interesting. And it also can just go to the fact that this kind of detail shows that there's intimate knowledge of the actual story and the people. And, everyone knows the guy with the nickname Didymus and all that stuff. He said to the rest of the disciples, let us go that we may die with him. He's ready. I mean, he's just raring to go.
Bring it on. Yeah, he's just like, so we ride together, we die together.
How come Thomas gets the Doubting Thomas nickname instead of the like zealous, like Jesus, like what
Thomas
would
the Spartan? I don't know. Just
Thomas the Spartan.
So it's an interesting narrative anyway, isn't it? Because we know, and I think I read this part in the sermon, the week before, all the other disciples have not believed until they've seen Jesus. There's no practical difference between the experience that's required. The women have come and said, we've seen Jesus, and the other disciples are like, right. No, crazy. And then they've seen Jesus. Thomas has come in and they've said, we've seen Jesus. And he's like, yeah, right. And they're like, no, you got to believe us, honestly. Completely forgetting, it's that spiritual growth dynamic of completely forgetting where you were 30 seconds before. I was in the same place, and now I'm so spiritual and so holy.
Yeah, now I believe.
Yeah, now I believe. How can you not believe? And we do that with so many things. We do that with our approach to things like slavery in America. We can't believe all of these backward nations all over the world still practice slavery, forgetting
how
that
could they?
Yeah, when we did it like 100 years ago at best.
Yeah.
So there's this weird human narrative that we quickly look down on people that are behind us in the journey. So Thomas only asks for what the others have received. But you could almost, I mean, I'm going to play a chunk with the story here, but you could almost believe Jesus being like, it would be lovely if one of them just believed, just based on the word of another.
He kind of even nods at that at the end. He's like, blessed are the ones who, yeah.
So maybe Thomas is his best shot at that. Maybe faithful Thomas, the Spartan, the ride or die guy, is the best shot at, oh, yeah, Thomas believed, and he didn't even have to see me. I don't know. Yeah, but regardless, he's
so all in on the Jesus story that he's willing to die. Maybe he's going to be the guy that's qualified to believe without seeing.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
And then you also, like, you wonder if maybe this is the time where Jesus is like, yeah, they're going to need the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Because
definitely going to need
all the other generations, they're not going to see my resurrected body. There's not a chance. They need some help.
I got to show myself to everyone.
If even Thomas can't believe without seeing, they need the Holy Spirit.
We've talked a couple of times about that show, The Chosen, which is just done really well. And I love the way it brings humor into Jesus' language, which I've always kind of read there. And there's the bit where he meets the woman at the well. It's in John chapter 4, if you've never read it. And she says something like, why isn't everybody talking about you? And he says, well, you're the first one I've told. It would be really good if you believed me. Like, it's just this, like, I'm trying this for the first time. Like, just
experiment
if
one.
You could go along with me. This would be great. So Thomas has this story. And I think it's helpful at this point to remind ourselves in amongst the almost legendary speech of John chapter 11 of let's go die with him, almost like that Spartan level speech. Thomas is maybe 17, 18 years old. You think about how you believed things at 17 and 18, you think even in our generation, which is probably a chunk different to what he experienced, there is a sense of I get into things and I commit fully to things, and I have moments where I haven't necessarily thought everything through and all of those different things. I've believed with my heart, not my head. I've followed through my gut instinct. It's not been a cognitive process. When we talk about Thomas and doubt, I don't think he's saying something like, having looked at the marketplace of faith, I no longer believe that Jesus provides the best existential hope for a future. He's saying, I threw everything into Jesus, and now he's dead. There's a hopelessness. There's a heart doubt. There's a I can't do this again feeling.
So we mentioned that at the beginning of the show, that this is one of the things we're going to talk about. And so I want to lean in here, because this was part of when I was restudying this passage that really resonated with my heart. So it hurts to hope.
Yeah.
Hope takes a certain amount of energy, and especially at this young age, hoping in something, especially something as grand as that the Messiah, the Savior of the entire world, the one that's going to make everything better, is here. It takes a lot of energy, and then when it's dashed, sometimes it's hard to believe that hoping is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, think about almost anything we experience in everyday life, like leading teams of people. Like I always have this awareness whenever I say to you guys on staff, oh, we're definitely going to do this, and we're definitely going to make it work. It's fine to say it once, but if it doesn't work the first time and you say another time, oh, we're definitely going to make it work the second time, there's a little bit more of a like, yeah, okay. And then the third time, people are just like, okay, whatever. This is just Alex being Alex. He's just going to say this stuff. But it's harder to believe every time. Same with a marriage. If you have a husband or wife that has an affair, maybe the first time you believe their apology, but if it's the second time or the fifth time, it's always harder to believe a new narrative. Like, it gets harder and harder and harder. The hopelessness increases. The the passage that comes to mind is in Proverbs 13:12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. When you've had hope and it's put off, you didn't get what you hoped for. It gets you right there. It's miserable.
Yeah. So if you're out there and you're like, yeah, I've actually, my strategy to deal with that heart sickness that Proverbs talks about is to, when I sense hope rising inside of me, I actually squash it because it's less painful to not hope in anything than it is to hope in something again. Wow. If that's someone out there,
totally.
There's been moments where I've felt that fear. What do we do with that? Maybe that's part of what's going on in Thomas's life. He's like, if Jesus actually rose, then the story isn't over. But if it's all a scam and it turns out he didn't, I'm not even going to let myself hope because then I can't be dashed.
Yeah.
Again.
And we'll see a little bit of this with the other disciples even after this in John 21. They kind of go back to fishing boats.
Yeah.
They're still playing catch up. And so you kind of like, you read it now and you're like, what are you doing? Why are you going fishing? And if you'd asked them, I guess they would probably have said, we don't know. But it's the only other thing that we know. And Jesus is dropping in and out in this wonderful Jesus like post-resurrection way. He's dropping in and saying, like, do you have any fish? Can we have breakfast? It's very interesting interactions. Like, I'm here for a meal and then I'm going. I actually have friends like that will come and eat and then ditch.
Yeah.
So there's all of those different elements.
Am I one of those friends? No, I'm just kidding.
You can see why there's so much emotion there. And yet at the same time, the continuation of that Proverbs passage is, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So somewhere Thomas is caught between that. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. I can't hope again. But it's actually only the fulfillment of this desire for Jesus to be all that he hopes he is that's going to give him the life that he wants.
Yeah. So pastorally, what's your recommendation? If someone's out there and they've been burned so many times by hope that they've actually trained themselves to just stop believing in big things. Stop believing that the world could actually be a little bit better. Stop believing that I could actually be in a deep relationship that's satisfying. Stop believing, you name it. What's your recommendation?
So I think, it's an understandable thing. So I think my first thought is not recommendations as much as sympathy.
Totally.
It's the language that comes to mind is we have the phrase getting back on the horse. And it's not that you get into whether it's a horse or whether it's a bike or whether it's a car, whatever it is, skiing, theoretically you get into some kind of big accident or something and it's emotionally difficult to make a decision to do it again. It's not that anything that you know about horse riding has gone. It's not that you've lost any of the information. It's not that you've lost any of the muscle memory. It's just this thing and this thing that says I can't do that again. And so in those situations, I think the recommendation is usually like small steps, isn't it? It's what's the small steps that you can take? Even actually climbing onto a docile horse after riding stallions and just sitting for a minute and getting off again is actually a helpful thing. Like if you've got to a point that in relationships, it's hard to believe there can ever be a good relationship. It actually might be just going on one date is actually a good step in towards believing you can have a conversation with someone. Having a friendship outside of a romantic interest might be, a really good option. If you've started to believe that you can never make a business work, actually getting involved on some level in some small thing and using talents that you have again, maybe for the first time since something terrible happened. Just those finding small steps, analyzing what's the small thing that I can do. And saying, God, I'd love to be able to, I think that desire to be able to hope again is maybe the thing to nurture. Because somewhere that's a deep core thing. That I would suggest is the thing that keeps Thomas there 8 days later.
Yeah, so it's almost like he doesn't even believe the words that
No,
are
I don't
coming
think
out
he
of his
does.
own
No,
mouth.
I think he's full of it.
He's like hovering around.
Yeah,
He didn't go to Emmaus.
Yeah, he didn't know. He absolutely. I can picture him being there, like, unless Jesus turns up, I'll never believe in him again.
I love that picture. Such a better picture of Thomas.
Yeah.
Doubting Thomas. It's actually Spartan Thomas.
Yeah. It's kind of like I do with my kids. Oh, I wonder where they could be.
With your kids.
That's
awesome.
And my kids do it in reverse. They're like, oh, you'll never catch me. They want to be caught. So I think there's just something going on with Thomas there that keeps him there, that kernel of hope. So sometimes, and I don't know what that looks like in a given situation, just sticking around seems like a valuable thing. Even when I have people come to me and say, I don't think I can do church anymore, whether it's a problem with South, whether it's a problem with the evangelical church as a whole. And I've come to this place where I'm pretty, proudly is the wrong word, pretty contentedly evangelical. Evangelicals are my people, even with all their weirdness and brokenness. And I say that as someone who has that weirdness and brokenness. So one of the things I'll say is just stick around. Someone said to me the other day, how can you hope that God will heal in this situation, like in the emotional situation? I'm like, just stick it out. Time is probably a thing. And if you want to sit here for a week and say, no, he didn't do anything, then, maybe something will happen, maybe it won't. But I do think there is a faithfulness and a hopefulness to just staying in the space. And that's what Thomas does. We have no perspective on how many times they gathered in those 8 days. Could have been 1, could have been 20, could have been every day, could have been all day, every day. But Thomas stays, and there's no particular evidence that he's like, this is the last time. If he doesn't turn up today, I'm done. I think Thomas would still be there now if he was still alive, still waiting on some level.
Yeah. So, and I think another maybe, obviously, if that's you, like, just know that hope is part of what it means to be a healthy human being.
Yeah.
Like, there's those quotes about, like, you can survive this many days without water, this many days without food. You can't survive a single day without hope. So, so your soul needs something to hope in. Now, choosing maybe the right things to hope in is also a helpful tip. And
what are those things?
I think the story...
Do we want to just say that's just Jesus?
I think so, in a lot of ways. And even both the stories, we just talked about 2 Sundays worth, but we could go back into this entire series is actually the whole series, this Riptide series is like, okay, all of these people that we're exploring throughout the series, encounters with Jesus post-resurrection, their hopes have been dashed.
Yeah. They're all in a place of hopelessness. I actually played with the title Hope in the Dark for the series, but Craig Rochelle wrote a book with the same title, and I was like, that seems a little...
That punk.
Yeah, on the nose.
But the point is, each one of these stories is a reminder that not even death is the end of a Jesus kind of story. And so... The road to Emmaus, they've given up hope. They're abandoning ship. They're running away from Jerusalem. And then he meets him and says, the story continues even post-death. Then Thomas, I've given up hope. I have to see. The story continues and continues. And so if you don't trust Jesus, okay, I understand that. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of those sorts of things that could be happening. But may I suggest that experimenting with hoping in Jesus might be the safest place to start. And I'm not saying hoping in Jesus that makes your life way more easy or all sorts of things. It's just the most compelling grand story possible.
I think one of that compelling grand story idea I love. To me, following Jesus is partly based on me having a sort of fundamental belief that he's the best explanation for the world. As it is created in its beauty, that his story reflects why it's broken and a hope for why it won't be one day. So to me, the Jesus grand narrative holds me in a good place.
Oh man, so good.
But also like this, and this is a G.K. Chesterton quote. I threw in the first part of this quote into the sermon, and I kept this second part for the podcast. Because it's even more.
You get special nuggets.
It's even
people.
more intriguing. Like it just will play with you a little bit. He passed in some superhuman manner through our human horror of pessimism. Like we find pessimism terrifying. We don't like pessimists. When we're in that place, we feel very comfortable, especially us Enneagram 7s. When the world shook and the sun was wiped out of heaven, it was not at the crucifixion, but at the cry from the cross, the cry which confessed that God was forsaken by God. Let the atheists themselves choose a God. They will find only one God who ever uttered their isolation. Only one religion in which God seemed for an instant to be an atheist. Which is just fascinating language. I mean, this is just G.K. Chesterton, and he's just pushing buttons best. But he's like, what does it mean for God on a cross to say, God has forsaken me? Why have you forsaken me? There's this moment where the God of the universe looks around in the darkness and says, how did the story end up here? And maybe your reading of that, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but maybe your reading is just it's the penal substitution thing, right? Like God is, distant from his son because he's putting all the sin of the world on him. And that's definitely a post reading of the thing. In the moment when Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? If the other disciples are listening, that's almost the worst moment for them, because that's the moment that they say Jesus has given up hope. Like he was the one that in the garden was like, don't fight. He was the one that was like, no, we're going through this. But for them, for the women, I mean, imagine Mary, his mother, listening. Imagine Mary. It's like, no, what? Jesus has lost faith. If Jesus in this moment doesn't believe anymore, why would I believe? There's a crushingness to the original moment that can't be explained theologically by
even
anyone.
the garden, like his doubts in the garden, all of these moments. Yeah, and then the scriptures tell us, like in Hebrews, it says, like, in every way tempted as we are, all of these kinds of things. That is Hebrews, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but there's something comforting, like, so maybe if you're feeling guilt that you have doubt.
Absolutely, that's a great segue. Yeah, if you feel guilty about doubt, Jesus is in that place, I would suggest, of the heart doubt, the existential doubt of this is the worst, lowest moment. It's not same with Thomas, it's not figuring out existential possibilities. It's not, can God make a thing that he can't destroy? Or is all of those different sort of problems that we could throw that give us a little bit of a deer in the headlights look. It's not those. It's this situation. It's how did we end up here? So when we hit those moments and find it hard to believe that God is caring for us in the situation, is good to us in the situation, is faithful. And it was funny, on Sunday, we sang this song about, all my life you have been faithful. And I just had this moment where I wondered how many of us feel that's true retrospectively when we look back, but have had moments where we've said, this doesn't feel like faithful.
I can tell you, as a worship pastor, some of the things that we sing, and I feel this often, I know that we're saying things, and some people in the room, sometimes I'm one of the people, is like, I don't even know if I believe this.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
Like, all my life, you've been faithful, except for that one time where I prayed for this thing and I thought I was in alignment with your will, and then it just blew up in my face. And I'm like, but I'm saying it because I'm supposed to say it. And oh man, that's heavy.
I mean, and that's best case scenario, right? Sometimes it's, and the thing that I prayed for 17 years and you didn't do. Oh, the fourth miscarriage. Oh, all of those different things that can come up. That sometimes it's a, yes, I see your faithfulness and presence retrospectively, but in so many moments I felt like you weren't there. That honest confession. And we actually had this. So you, for one, are this sort of weird worship leader. Just as a compliment to you, someone described you to me as a unicorn once. Someone said like Aaron's like a unicorn. He's like, he can think really well. He's really strategic. He sings delightfully. He can speak well. Like he's just got so many strings to this bow.
But he does kind of look like a caveman. So there's that.
But not too.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just joking.
Before we go too far down the compliment line, there is a beauty when you sing that some worship leaders. Like, I look at them and I'm like, I don't think you've thought or felt anything. It's just like, if I could get inside your head, it's just like an empty box of just singing songs.
Yeah.
That definitely, I don't love that kind of worship leading. So I love that we have you leading us in those songs, knowing you've processed some of those things and knowing that the community know that you've processed some of those things because of the way you share in sermons. But for anyone who comes into a worship gathering, I'm pretty convinced, and we've talked briefly about doing something at some point in a sermon on why we sing and what that looks like. And I'm pretty convinced, going back to that, what do you do when you find yourself hopeless? And my sort of response of you keep putting yourself in the place of God's presence. Because I think on any given week, there's a bunch of people that sing joyfully and in a place of goodness. And there's a bunch of people that sing in a place of brokenness and doubt. And I'm pretty sure there's a group of people that come in and say, I can't sing today. And we as a community sing for them. Like, we as a community join in song, and we almost sing over them.
Yeah.
For them.
So I've shared this maybe a couple times in the context of a worship service, but there was this massive aha moment for me as a worship leader one time, because I was wrestling with this issue. There's times, even as your worship pastor, where I stand up there and I'm like not there. And I'm hurting and I'm not even sure I'm saying things that I believe. And I'm like, what do I do? There's like this tension of like, am I being inauthentic? Am I lying to the congregation because I'm not feeling it right now and I'm acting like I'm feeling it, and all these sorts of things. And I was like, how do I wrestle with this almost duality in my soul? And I'm sure there's moments where you're there as a preacher as well.
And as a front row worshiper. Like, just to me, like someone said to me the other day, you're just always so into the worship and always so, I'm like, yeah, because it's a choice. Like, I mean, there's moments where I stand there, I'm like, wish I could just sit here and watch everyone else. There's moments where I'm like, I don't know, you know.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about the way you think about those moments is, and this is a tip for everyone out there, you may not know this, and you may not even believe me, but your worship is affected by the people around you, and their worship is affected by you.
Yeah.
So I'm not the only worship leader in the room. Every single human being that walks into a worship gathering is a worship leader. And you may not agree with that, but there's sociology studies that agree with that. There's historical studies that agree with that. There's we as human beings cannot help but be affected by the presence of other human beings and their engagement of a subject or of a gathering or whatever. So we're all leading each other and our willingness to lean into it. And so you do that on a Sunday morning. Part of it's intentional, part of it's authentic, part of it's all these things, is you're like, I want to be part of a community that's leaning into this moment.
And I think we've started to have this dangerous premise in so many things around feelings. I've only been authentic when I feel like doing it.
Totally.
Well, there's times in a relationship you don't feel like loving your husband or wife, but still doing it is still authentic. And so I think while feelings are important, we just did a whole series on emotions. Believing that you're not being authentic when you are doing something you don't feel like doing, I don't think that's a baseline truth that we can hold on to. And so someone said to me the other day that had someone in their church come to them and say, what can we do as leaders on a Sunday morning to help the church and its culture? You know, do you need us like welcoming on the doors? Do you need us doing kids, all these different things? And the answer to some of those things is yes.
Yeah.
But the answer he actually gave was, if 50 of you could be in the service worshiping passionately with abandon, that would change the culture of the church overnight.
Yeah, I remember there's two Easters ago. I think it was 2 Easters ago. We introduced Graves into Gardens for that Easter.
Not last Easter, the Easter before.
Yep.
Easter 2021.
And then one of the services, the high school group decided, because they loved that song and they were excited about Easter. There was like there's this really cool culture in the youth group right now of some of these young leaders who are just like really passionate about Jesus. And so they decided we're just going to own this thing. And so right when Graves into Gardens came up, they actually walked right up in front of the stage and they just got after it.
Yeah.
And I think even if you're the person in the room who's saying, why are they approaching the stage? This isn't a concert. You could not help but be moved. The energy in that gathering was 10 times more powerful than any gathering I've been a part of at South Fellowship Church within the last 3 years.
It was just, it was.
And it was 12 high school students who decided, I don't care what people think about me. I'm going to get up front and I'm going to declare that the grave is empty.
Yeah. And
do it with energy.
And isn't that a great, segue?
I don't know how we got to this subject.
It's delightful, but it's about worshiping and hope and all this different things. But like the 12 high school kids reference is the reminder of, these earliest disciples are, they're 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. The fact that Jesus says to Peter, we need temple tax for you and I, suggests they're the only ones over 21. Like no one else is paying tax on temple entrance. They're all children, essentially. And so when we see 12 high school people change the culture of a service, Jesus picked 12 of them to help change the world, which is fascinating. That, when I spoke to these high schoolers the other day, I just said to them, if you are in a community that says to you, wait 20 years before you do something, go and find another community. Because that's not what God has called you to do. You're part of now, not part of then in the future.
Yeah. The church needs a little bit of young, maybe slightly naive, but passionate people. Because that's part of what makes I love that.
I preached some of my best sermons when I was young and naive and passionate.
That's right.
I also preached some of my worst sermons when I was in that age as well.
And sometimes it was the same sermon.
Sometimes
it was the best and the word.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So going back to this idea of Jesus doubting and, he gets it.
Yeah.
He gets it.
It's for him, it's felt as well, which is a theological conundrum. And that's where the G.K. Chesterton idea comes in. That plays with us a little bit because we like to believe that Jesus operated in certainty all the time because he's Jesus. And that makes us comfortable. I actually heard someone say once, Jesus wasn't a human, he was a superhuman. I'm like, Jesus operates in a superhuman way because he operates in faith in his Father. He does what he sees his Father doing. But his humanity has to be real for the story to be real.
Yeah, and I would, I agree with you, but I'd maybe agree with you even more aggressively against what they said.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, I feel like if you don't get how important, like Philippians 2 concept of this kenosis, or like, is that the word? The emptying of himself.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm like throwing
Greek words out. I don't know which word you mean. Like there's lots of them.
I think that's so important. Like if you it's so unhelpful to say, Jesus, obviously he can obey God because he's God.
Yeah, that's not a helpful statement.
That's theologically, it's just wrong. Paul, the apostle, spends a lot of energy in his writings trying to convince you of the opposite, that he operated, and even Jesus himself in the Gospels, he's saying he used his humanness to obey God,
absolutely,
not his godness.
It's like the worst case scenario. It's both wrong and unhelpful. When you land there.
And theologically, it's very important that you don't get this one wrong.
I can push into the wrongness. Now, I think a final point, and maybe this is wrapping up because some of you have said occasionally, wow, you guys talk for a long time. Like, I don't necessarily want to hear you for 55 minutes and whatever. We're at 34 right now. That's pretty good. Is that right?
Yeah. No, we're at 48.
Okay, it just says 34 on the screen.
We're 48. Sorry.
Maybe that's a different thing. If you have someone that you are in relationship with, that you're seeing going through these dark nights of the soul, all of those different things, sometimes that's a slightly different tweak on the question. Like it's easy to say, what do I do? Or easier maybe to say, what do I do in these situations than what do I do with a friend who's really there? And I heard this beautiful modern parable the other day. It's a story of a carpenter who moves to a town, And just through his work and his care for people, he starts to become known as someone that can be relied on. And one of the men in the town experiences this great tragedy. And the carpenter is just the one that he finds solace in. They sit together, they drink whiskey at night in front of a fireplace. They have conversations sometimes about the deep hurt that this man has been through, sometimes about just other things. And finally, the man says, well, I'm going to go to a pastor and get counsel on everything I've been through, because I need someone to speak into this. And so he goes to the pastor, and the pastor explains to him theologically that it was good that he suffered, because it would, give him another level of faith in the future, and all these different nice
like I almost
theological
said
answers.
a little bit ago.
Yeah. All this little pithy sort of answers. And the man leaves a little discouraged, but he goes back to his friend, the carpenter, and he says, well, I guess he must be right. Somewhere there'll be a good answer to this. And the carpenter just looks at him and says, wow, if you had to suffer to know that God was good, that seems like the greatest sadness of all. Like they're just a different counsel, a different type of wisdom, and they continue to sit together. And it really, the point of the parable is that neither particularly the carpenter are right theologically, nor the pastor are right theologically. Neither right nor wrong. What the carpenter does is that companionship thing. He sits with him night after night. This isn't just a person that gives a message and then leaves. There's the companionship element to walking through a dark night of the soul. In the same way, if Thomas can just stay in the space, and he does, if we can just stay in the conversation with people and not necessarily have to give all of the right answers.
And tying back to what you just said a little bit ago, the fact that Jesus understands, he's the kind of companion that stays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gosh, so
and
good.
we are so addicted to right answers. We don't recognize the journey part. We're like, if I can just get to an answer, there's something about the waiting period that's actually not as bad as it is important. So
and it seems to be like Jesus is a little bit more comfortable with that than we are. So.
8 days, poor Thomas.
Yeah.
8 days. Well, I love it. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. If you have any questions, I just checked on. I don't see anything right now. That's totally fine. But feel free to drop them in there, because like we did today, we can retroactively start to answer questions. If you are hearing this and drop the questions on Facebook or YouTube,
your questions.
I try to check every week if there's questions from the previous week, and we'll try and address them. Do
Even
the
if
like,
it's just
subscribe thing.
Just let us know what color shirts we're supposed to wear next week. This week.
Anything else to cover?
I don't think so.
All right.
Love you guys. See you on Sunday or next week.
And we're signing off.